I did want to record, and I will upload this later when it becomes available to my Cree, Iowa website on YouTube. Go to Cree, C-R-E-E, Iowa on YouTube. I've got 2 other videos. So the review that we did in May, I've got 2 parts to it. I think it's total of 4 hours of review. About 3 hours or so of it are national, and then about another hour is state. And we did a pretty thorough job, I think, of national. A lot of people have found those reviews helpful. I'll put this one up there as soon as I can get it to be available. It might be tomorrow or so. I thought we could review what's actually on the exam as kind of a refresher, and then we could maybe take some questions about what's really kind of going to be your stumbling blocks as you've been studying, maybe what some questions are that stand out to you. You know that I love this PSI guide, and all of you, for the most part, have done 60-hour with me. So the copy that you maybe have of this PSI guide, my version has all these little red numbers next to it, and those red numbers are what matches up with the Modern Real Estate book as a reminder what page you can find the information on. So just as kind of a general review, the exam is going to be state. You'll probably, it's based on 40 questions. You need 28 to pass. National is 80 questions. You'll need 56 to pass. Now, I have a feeling they're going to test you on more questions than that, maybe 90 and 45. Again, they try to do some fancy kind of testing of their own of those questions. So you might have a few more, but it's still 56 and 28 to pass both of those. The state you will take first. When you go in and log into the computer, they'll have you do a quick little test to make sure that you understand how the computer works. So they'll ask you some basic questions like, how many states are there? When do we celebrate our nation's birthday? Some hopefully pretty easy questions for you to kind of get answered. And then it will go into the state portion. You've got 60 minutes to take that exam. When you are done with that one, it will ask you 3 times. Are you done? Are you sure you're done? Are you really sure you're done? That type of question. And you click yes, yes, yes if you really are. And then it will move you forward to the national. And again, you need 56 to pass that one. And they will give you 2 hours to take that. So you got a total of 3 hours, and please plan there to be the entire time. Even when I go and audit, I'm there at least 2.5. Now I'm doing different things while you're there, but know that if you do that at a cadence of spending about 1 minute on each test question, 1 minute on each test question, then you will be able to spend about 6 or 7 minutes on each math question. So there is a way at the test center for when you log on, do some playing around with it, because what they allow you to do is mark questions. So if there's really one you want to go back to, you can. Now, we've talked about our mindset around math if you've been in class with me before. A lot of you want to say, I'm not good at math. That was my least favorite topic in high school. Guys, let that go. You all actively participate in your checkbooks as adults, correct? And you know whether there's money in there or not, right? Which means you are already good at math, okay? So let that go, because the exciting thing about math and real estate is if you know how to multiply, you're going to be able to figure out how much your commission checks are, right? So yeah, you're ready for some of those. I know you are. So let that feeling go. But even if you're a little excited about math, know that if it helps you to save those to the end and not let them burn you out, you can. Mark those and then go back. But do make sure you go back and answer all of the questions. One thing I have found is people get excited, they think they're done, and they say, yes, 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 I'm done, and they log out. And I have a feeling that sometimes they don't answer all of the question. They maybe marked a few things, that they didn't go back and take care of. The other thing I'm going to caution you on is changing too many answers. I'm not saying, I know it's hard when you're studying and you're already anxious about whether you know the right answer or not. But statistically, they say that somebody that goes back and changes too many answers sometimes fails because their gut instinct was actually right. So I'm not saying that that's foolproof, but I have heard that several times. And I've had several students that have missed the exam by a couple of questions. And I've said, did you go back and change any? He said, yeah, I went back and changed 10. And I thought, that might have been just the 2 you needed, right? So just be careful while you're kind of going through that. So you should have plenty of time to take the exam. Like I've said, as my mother says, go fed and watered, which means you go with a snack. Don't let your blood sugar drop, and make sure you use the potty, because if you do get up to go to the restroom, that counts against your time. And obviously they monitor it, and it's weird. They have to. Now let's just review, because not many of you have been to the test center yet. When you go to the test center, you'll need 2 forms of ID, and you will need your certificate of completion. Most of you have that from me, but you will need a paper copy of it. Don't take it on your iPhone or on your cell phone. Take a paper copy. Take 2 forms of ID. Now, I prefer that both of them be government issued, like a passport, a military card, or a driver's license. If you don't all have that, I believe a credit card works as well. Just make sure that all of your names match on those, because I know every once in a while we've got someone that gets married and we're in transition. We maybe got a paper copy or something. Also, when you go to the test center, keep in mind now, Sean, I'm not going to say you go shirtless. I'm just teasing you. But I have had people go with hoodies and a jacket over it, and they made them take off the hoodie, and then they had to just take the exam with their little fleece over it, and they said it was super embarrassing. So make sure you go with clothing that's ladies, not super flyaway, not a lot of big pockets, no hats, no hoodies. What are those little Patagonia? I know that this probably isn't the weather for it because it's hot now, with the little zippers here and there. I've seen those be requested to take off. So go dressed very simply. Don't take a lot of extra personal items in with you. I wouldn't take in a huge backpack. Ladies, I don't think that this is the big time for our carry-on tote purse, right? Take as little in with you, but what you do take in, they will put in a locked backpack, okay? No iPhone watches come off. iPhones get shut off. So I just don't even take those things in with me. But I will recommend, as just a little Amy reminder, if you leave your cell phone in the car when it's hot like this, put it in a cool spot, not in the sun, because I accidentally did that, and then my cell phone didn't turn on for 30 minutes, and I had cell phone withdrawal. Okay.
No calculations, Amy.
No calculations, no calculators.
No.
So they want you to just use their calculator.
Yeah, they gave me a calculator when I took it. When I went into it, they gave me a calculator, and I did wear a hoodie. I had to take off my hoodie, my watch, all that.
Yeah.
Pens and pencils. No.
I would say I've always used their calculator, and then they will give you a number 2 pencil, and they will also give you a piece of paper with your name on it for you to use the scratch paper, and then you got to turn that piece of paper in.
Yeah.
Now, I've said this before, and I mean this lovingly. They are there to run the processing in of the testing center, and there are security measures that they've got to take. Otherwise, guys, you would each pay me 10 grand and I'd go take the test for you, right? I mean, we can't do that. They really do have to do security measures, and sometimes they're a little abrasive about it. And just keep in mind, there's no one that just graduated from high school that's like, I want to run a testing center where other professionals get licensed and make a ton of money. No one's really doing that. I mean, this is a job, not a career for them. And they're there to do a specific job and follow rules. They're not there to think their own thoughts. So if they come across as a little harsh, because I know some of you high personalities take that personally, don't. Just know that they're there to do a job. The last time I went to the test center, 5 people checked in before me. So I would recommend going 30 minutes before your test time. So if it starts at 9, be there at 8:30. I went promptly at 8:30 the last time I tested, and I was the last person they checked in. And I'm glad, because I was there to audit, but it also gave me a good glimpse of what those people are going through as they check in. And there was a woman working there that was very rude to one of the gals checking in. And you could tell she totally imploded on it. She started shaking her leg. She was fighting back tears. She was really frustrated. And I couldn't say, let it go, right? I couldn't say that to her, but I would have loved to, because if I had been able to have 60 seconds with that woman before she walked into the test center after being treated rudely, I could have corrected her and helped her pass the exam. Seriously, I guarantee you. That's just, so don't let those things bother you. Go focused and be prepared to follow the rules. Okay? And then pass that exam. So let's just go over, I think I want to spend the majority of our time together today on national, because I think that that's probably, again, the biggest whale that we need to conquer as you're testing. I think a lot of you in terms of the state are probably sitting pretty well. This PSI guide, if you go to page 3, it has the examination summary table. That just as a review of what I've shared with you previously. But let's go through the outline, and if you don't have the outline with you for some reason, just take notes on what I have to share with you here. The first category that you're going to need to review is property ownership. You'll have 6 to 7 test questions on that. Test questions around that will be around real versus personal property. So what makes something go from personal property to real property? Well, it's when we have the basic definition is when its intended is to be permanent, like cabinets, lighting, HVAC, concrete work, sewer, plumbing, electrical, right? But if there's ever a question whether it's real or personal, what should you do? Put it in the contract so that you specify it. Another category under this will be land characteristics and legal descriptions. There's 3 types of legal descriptions: meets and bounds, lot and block, and that government or rectangular survey. And that's the one where I think that you're going to need to know the section is a square mile. There's 640 acres in a square mile. And then each of those is 43,560 square feet. Now, when I go to the test center, I write down 640, and I write down that an acre is 43,560. I write those 2 numbers before I even touch the computer. I write them up in the corner of that scratch piece of paper. Mine's always Robin's Egg Blue with my name on it. I write those numbers down. That way, if I get anxious during the test and I'm like, is it 460 or 640? And my mind wants to go like crazy talk, it doesn't happen in the moment because I already wrote it down. Cool, calm, and collected, right? So I definitely think you'll have a reason to need that 640 and that 43,560. And then I would know the definitions of those 3. Couple of times, the very first question I've had on the exam is, what's a means of describing property with a point of beginning that traces the exterior of the property and returns you back to that point of beginning? Meets and bounds, right? So I would just know those 3 definitions. I would know mineral, air, and water rights. Water rights, of course, is going to be littoral or riparian. Littoral, I always remember, is lakes or larger. Riparian is rivers or smaller. And then when it comes to rivers, the question is it navigatable or not? Like, who owns it? So who owns the mighty Mississippi? Not it, right? That is a state government owned because it's navigatable. So you're going to own that to the banks, correct? Another really good question is owning up to high water tide on beachfront property. There will be a section on encumbrances. And you've got 4 encumbrances: liens, easements, encroachments, and then there's other encumbrances of title, but those would be deed restrictions. So a lien, again, is a charge against a property to secure repayment of a debt. So liens can come from a mortgage. Another popular one is a mechanic's lien. So you may be paid to have your roof replaced, and then you don't pay the contractor. They'll put a mechanic's lien on your property for it. An easement is the right for someone else to use your property, but it doesn't rise the level of actual ownership. So we maybe have a neighboring farm that just needs about 10 feet of your driveway to go up and pop over onto their property, okay? Another very common type of easement is anything around utilities. An encroachment is when someone creeps their property onto yours. So maybe a fence line got set on your property. My dad on the farm one time, the farm neighbor put in a silo for corn storage and set it on half on dad's land, half on theirs. That's an encroachment. And then deed restrictions are what tells you how you can use the land. It is not a building code that's set by the city, but deed restrictions are going to be things in a development that say, once you pour a foundation, the rest of the house has to be built within 8 months. You can't have silver chain link fence. If you put in a pool, you've got to do this. You've got to plant at least 3 trees in this family of trees. You can't plant any that are maybe ash, for example. They'll have restrictions like that, maybe even down to the architectural style and minimum square foot. So building codes are for safety. A lot of these deed restrictions are for design. Okay. Types of ownership are going to be tenants in common, joint tenancy, common ownership, and sole ownership. Now, I think on the exam, your 2 most likely types of ownership are either going to be tenants in common or joint tenancy. And for me, it's always been joint tenancy that has said which of the following types of ownership have the distinguishing right of survivorship. And anytime you see right of survivorship, that's your ding, 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 that it's joint tenancy, because joint tenancy says that upon death, there's simply just one less owner. That's the right of survivorship. Another good test question that I've seen is something around the fact is, what is the type of ownership that would eliminate the need for probate to a widowing spouse? Again, that would be joint tenancy because there's simply one less owner. We don't need to read a will to see who else has ownership rights like tenancy in common. Okay. Another trio of things that's, I think, good for you to know is a condo, a co-op, and then I'm going to throw in there timeshare because I feel like the 3 of those run together in a family quite a bit. A condo is going to be a traditional deed where you own your unit and basically some common space. A co-op is you're basically going to own stock in the building, and in exchange for that, you get your unit. So you own stock in a corporation, and the benefit is you get to live in your unit, okay? But there's not a traditional deed that goes with it. It's a proprietary lease. And then a timeshare, of course, I'm sure you're familiar with that, with vacation spots where you get to stay there for the same week every month. So you get ownership just for a specific period of time. Now, life estate ownership is another one I'm going to throw in here really quick for you. You've basically got two big rocks for estates. You've got a fee simple and you've got a life estate. A fee simple is the highest ownership value that you can have, okay? And there's an automatic succession, whether you got a will or not, of who gets it next. You either will it to someone, or the state has a general guide of what they're going to do, okay? It says you didn't have a will, but here's the plan of next of kin that it will go to. Every state has their own kind of assemblage on that. A life estate is when we're doing something for the life of another. So maybe my daughter and her husband have a child, and I don't really like my son-in-law. I think he's kind of a dealing and never has a job. No, I don't know. But my beloved daughter, I always think of Terms of Endearment, the movie with this, is she did not like her son-in-law very much, did she? For those of you that watched that movie, didn't like him a lot, but loved on those grandchildren. But her daughter dies early of a very young age of cancer, correct? She would probably do a life estate so that when she passes, she's not giving her estate to young children, but she's maybe letting her son-in-law inherit it for the life of another. And that for the life of another would be her grandchildren. So when Chip or Skip or whatever his name is in the movie passes, he does not get to control who gets it next. The provisions of her will do. Okay, so it's, think of the term for a life of another. I have a friend that's going through this right now. Her grandmother passed away and her mother inherited everything. Her mother's will had not been updated in several years. And 6 months later, her mom died of a heart attack. Her stepfather inherited everything. 2 weeks after her mother died of a heart attack, he committed suicide. And now his 3 children get everything. She gets nothing from her grandmother. She gets nothing from her mother. All of that now is going to the provisions of his, how the state takes a look at that. She's going to inherit none of those things. Where if it had really been set up like a life estate, it would have not navigated to what happened when the husband died. It wouldn't have navigated to his children, it would have navigated to her. Does that make sense? That life estate is not utilized as much as I think it should be, my opinion. Number 2 is land use controls and regulations. You will have 4 test questions. This is going to be government rights in land, and the big one is going to be eminent domain. Eminent domain is that process of the government taking land for public use. You'll absolutely have a test question around that. And then there's 2 other the process of doing it. Eminent domain is the thing. That's what I'm going to call the noun. The verb to get there, the action to get there, is called condemnation. And then another good term for you is a sheet, E-S-H-E-A-T. That is the government's way of taking personal property for their ownership when someone dies with no will and no heirs. They die intestate. Intestate's the key word there. Other government controls are going to be zoning regulations, whether it's zone commercial, residential, special use, industrial, agriculture. Building codes, again, this is city or statutory laws that require us to have rebar in the foundation so it doesn't fall apart. 2x4s to be so far apart so you don't fall through the wall. Those are all things to keep us safe. And then again, it talks about deed restrictions, which again are like covenants, conditions and restrictions, or homeowners association regulations that say you can only have 1 dog or 2 cats if you live in this association, and the dog must be under 25 pounds. That's a really common one in condos and townhomes. But again, deed restrictions, who manages those? Not the city. It's the homeowners association. So I know I've given you, a lot of you, the example of my niece and her husband, who were really upset with this silver, metal, and glass 3-story home that was built in their beautiful Tuscan stucco and stone neighborhood. And the city ought to do something about it. And I was like, oh, wait, sorry. It's not the city that does that. You need to take that up. The homeowners association needs to basically sue that seller to perform. But by then it was too late, right? So they kept waiting for the city to do something, and that was the wrong person. Great test question. Number 3 on your list is going to be valuation and market analysis. You will have 5 or 6 test questions around this. And I want you to think, they've given it a fancy name. It's appraisals. So the purpose and the use for an appraisal, again, it is an opinion of market value. Market value, not list price, not sales price, but market value. General steps for the appraisal process. I believe there's 7 of them. And I just think knowing the first one will be really helpful for you. And that is to define the problem. Why are we even doing this appraisal? What's the purpose of it? Refinance, selling it, and what are we selling it for? And the example that I've often used is you've got a 2-bedroom bungalow on an acreage that's now surrounded by strip malls. You know, they're that last property to sell as land is developed, right? We've all seen that house we've been driving by, like, how are they still there? They're holding on, right? When that sells, the appraiser needs to define the problem. Is that selling as another 2-bedroom bungalow on an acreage, or is it selling as now commercial property? That would make a big difference in how they valued the land, correct? And in that case, they're probably valuing the land and the cost to remove that property. They talk a little bit about the effect of economic principles and property characteristics. I think that these are kind of the basic principles of appraisal. There are several of those. There's like 8, 9, or 10 basic principles of appraisal. Supply and demand could come in on that. Another really good one I've seen on the exam is anticipation. So if a seller calls and says, Patricia, I heard that the local employer in our community is going to be shutting its doors and moving everything to Texas, for example. When should we sell? What's the answer? Now. Now's the best time. Now's the best time because it's at its highest. Once all of that hits the fan, supposedly, that's going to change, right? So the answer is now. So that's a really good one as well. Supply and demand, though, that's the basics of you got high demand on properties but low inventory. It causes the price to go up. If you've got not a lot of demand and you've got a high amount of inventory, what's that going to do with the price? Exactly, it's going to go down. And just so you know, guys, as you're getting your license and you're talking to your database, have you guys been working on your database in this time at all? Excellent work. As you're talking to them, and as Aishan says, guys, I'm working, I'm getting my real estate license. COVID isn't going to stop me from this. So in the future, if you're looking to make a move, I'm going to be your guy, but I'm working on it. Make sure that you note of anybody that says, yeah, we'd be interested in making a move. Call them as soon as you get your license, because we are so short on inventory. We've literally seen inventory drop even lower than where it was in 2016. And I know where you all live. I didn't mean that as a threat.
Yeah.
But I know where you all live because I make your certificates is what I meant. And I know some of you live in some real good ones. Now you need to find another place to live. But your house is probably worth more than it's ever been today. We've still had a very strong market, which is good news. You've got three ways that we price homes. You've got the sales comparison approach, you've got the cost approach, and you've got the income analysis. So the sales comparison approach is where we compare one property to others that have sold. So it works really good for residential because there's a lot more data to pull. My classic test question that I think I've shared with you on that one is a 3-bedroom home sells for $180,000. What's the most likely sales price for a 2-bedroom with fireplace if we know a 3rd bedroom is worth $5,000 and a 2-bedroom is, or a 3rd bedroom is worth $5,000, fireplace is worth $2,000? Yeah, so we're going to make adjustments to the sold property, not the comparable. We're going to take that 180, we're going to make it a 2-bedroom, which brings it down to 175. Then it's got a fireplace. We're going to add that in. So your most likely sales price would be 177. Okay, that's a great example of a sales comparison approach, great for residential properties. Cost approach is where we basically take the property down to bare land. We establish the value of bare land. We add in the cost to build it new. And then we use the principles of depreciation to bring it down to a most likely sales price. And the way that we do that depreciation is through physical, functional, and external. So physical that makes something obsolete would be a physical deterrent would be, you know, it just needs new paint, carpet, things that you're definitely probably going to get your money back if you do. Functional obsolescence is where it's got something that's of such a nuisance, it really does not function as people would want it to now. So maybe you've got an office building where you've got to go through one office to get to another. Or you've got some weird shared bathroom situation. You've got maybe some really, really outdated plumbing that's going to be a lot trickier to take care of. I'll tell you one of our biggest ones. I know not all of you are here in Des Moines with us, but that Kay's merchandise that sits along 86th Street south of Douglas behind that McDonald's, that is a functional obsolescence issue to me, because getting in and out of that parking lot with such a quick turn before you're on 86th Street, not having a storefront right along 86, that parking lot has caved in several times. All of those things are a functional obsolescence of how that building was built. External obsolescence, that example is going to be something outside the property that you cannot control. The smell of hog manure wafting through your restaurant now, probably going to affect it, right? Or maybe it will make it more popular. We don't know. It's Iowa. A lot of people think that manure smells like money. Okay, that's the cost approach. The income approach is where we're basically using the income that we make Determining a net income based on a capitalization rate in order to understand the value. This works really good for income properties. Again, sales comparison is going to be great for residential. Cost approach is going to be really good for commercial or industrial, where there's not really a building that's like another building. So tones, spices, Hy-Vees would be a good example. They build their buildings specific to them, correct? Income analysis approach. The income approach is going to be really good for apartment buildings, like a 16-plex. We know that we charge $500 a unit. There's 10 units. So that's $5,000 a month. By the time we take out mowing and maintenance and insurance, we're maybe netting $2,000, I don't know, and lost rent. So the net income of it is $2,000 a month or $24,000 a year. There's usually some sort of capitalization rate to apply to that. I've seen a lot of those between 8 and 12% is what I've heard other people's chat about. We could take that net income by that rate, and then that would help us establish a value. Okay. Financing, you've got 8 test questions, and I want to separate for you of those 8 test questions. Financing is different than math. So financing is going to be questions around points, like discount points. Again, a discount point is 1% of the amount borrowed, not the purchase price, not the appraised value. It's 1% of the amount being borrowed. Loan to value is the relationship between the amount borrowed and the amount putting down. So if we're buying a $100,000 property, we're putting $10,000 down, easy math. It's a 90% loan to value. PMI is private mortgage insurance, and a great test question is, what's the purpose of private mortgage insurance? The buyer pays for it, but it does not benefit them. It's not a mortgage protection so that if they get laid off because of COVID, they can still make sure that their mortgage payment gets paid. No. The borrower or buyer pays for it, and it protects the lender. So that if the buyer does default, they can recoup their costs through insurance. PMI is used anytime someone puts less than 20% down. Interest is a percentage rate. That's how the bank makes money on the money that they lend to you. PITI is another good term for you. That's principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Those 4 items are what makes up your house payment. So the amount that it takes to pay down the principal balance, the interest rate that the bank charges you, the amount you pay to your county and property taxes, and the amount that you pay to your insurance agent for homeowners insurance. PITI. Then there's some other financing instruments like a mortgage and a promissory note. A mortgage is specific to the repayment of that property. A promissory note is simply a promise to repay a debt. So when you borrow, you'll sign a promissory note that says you'll repay the debt. The mortgage will actually spell out the terms of how you're going to pay it back. What the rate is, your amortization schedule. If you don't pay, you don't stay. If you don't pay, there's probably an acceleration clause that says it's due upon notice, the full amount. There's probably an alienation clause that says if you sell it, you've got to pay off the balance of the mortgage. You can't just keep that and then go keep buying more houses. You've got several different types of loans. Conventional FHA, VA, USDA. Conventional FHA, VA, USDA, those are all amortized loans where you're going to have a fixed payment. Okay, it's going to be a fixed amount that you pay every month, and in the rate for interest and in the principal balance. Now, obviously, if insurance and taxes adjust, that changes your payment. But those two things are fixed. FHA loans, I want you to think of FHA as like an insurance agency. And I know a lot of real estate agents that have been licensed for years that get this confused. FHA is not the lender. FHA is the government insurance policy that basically protects that product. So any banker basically can do an FHA loan. They're going to go to the government for insurance on it. VA is another similar product to that. Basically, the Department of Veterans Affairs is doing a funding fee that can also be financed by the veteran. And that's kind of, again, their insurance policy, because they're lending. That's about one of the only 100% products out there.
Hey,
So you don't necessarily need a special veterans lender. You just need any lender that does VA loans, and then they look to the veterans department to actually secure it. They do that certificate of reasonable value. That's another good term to know around VA loans. Hey, Sean, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say there was a question around the VA loans when I took it, but it was more on the lines of like, what was I really can't remember, but it was like why that it was so special for the VA loan or something in that nature, for them to have it, or like they don't have to pay so much or some. It was just something like that. I can't really remember.
Yeah, there's a lot of perks. They don't have to put any money down. I've seen the debt to income ratio be a little bit more forgiving. I've seen the credit score be a little bit more forgiving. But it is a great loan product. Again, they can do 100% financing just for serving our awesome country.
Yeah, that's
they're
what it
awesome.
was. Like they don't have to put anything down. And then when I seen that, it was like, what? That doesn't sound right. And that's exactly what
they don't have to put anything down.
Was.
And VA does new construction, resales. I mean, they do a lot of products for those veterans. That's a great, one of those, it's the least we can do, right? For serving our country. I've gotten the privilege, though, to work with a lot of veterans, and I've got a really good lender that works, that's a former veteran himself. And he likes to employ veterans as well, and does a really good job. So I send my veterans there, but I don't do it because he is a veteran. I mean, I could send those buyers anywhere. I send him because he does really good service, because he gets it.
Yeah.
You said certificate of what, to kind of remember with the
certificate of reasonable value.
Okay.
Certificate of reasonable value equals VA. Is that what you meant? Yeah,
Yep.
That's what I had.
Yep, those two are friends. USDA is going to be that agricultural loan. I've not really seen that on the exam in my experience, but it is on the outline. And that is going to be for communities less than 10,000. That's a 100% financing product as well, by the way. So if you're going to be listing some things in, what is it, Adkins? Is that near Sioux City? I don't know, some of those smaller towns that I see you guys sign up under, and I have to look it up on a map to see where you live. But you folks, that might be a loan product for you to take advantage of in your business. Every once in a while I see something that comes up. I thought Adkins was one I saw recently. No takers. Okay, it must have been someone else. This talks a little bit about selecting and adjusting properties, and really selecting properties. The appraiser is going to want things in the same neighborhood that sold within the last 12 months. So I could see a question that says, a property is, you're doing an appraisal on a property, which of the following would be the best? A similar community that sold within the last 3 months, something in your neighborhood that sold within the last 12 months, a foreclosure, you know, it's going to give you some examples, and it's look for the answer that is same neighborhood, 12 months or less. Adjustable rate mortgages, again, that's the loan that the rate adjusts. So it'll be fixed for a certain number of years, and then that rate can adjust. And know that if that rate adjusts up to a full point, and the money, there's more money out there, the rate actually went up 2%, but they can only increase your payment by 1%. They're going to make up for that difference by doing what? Adding it to the balance of your loan. So that's called reverse amortization, or on the exam, I believe it was called negative amortization. And then owner financing, that would be like a, when you buy something on contract, and the owner of the property still technically stays on title with you, and you basically make a mortgage payment to them. Next section of that is going to be Truth in Lending, RESPA, and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Truth in Lending and RESPA and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Equal Credit Opportunity Act is basically the non-discrimination of obtaining a mortgage. RESPA is the Real Estate Settlement Protection Act that works in harmony with Truth in Lending. And this is the one that says that everything must be disclosed to its truest form of obtaining credit. So the original loan disclosure, when they apply for the loan, and the closing disclosure must match. If there's even a 0.3 difference in the interest rate on the closing disclosure, they've got to redisclose that and add another 3 days. So the loan disclosure is in place for 3 days, but the key one I think you could see on the exam is that closing disclosure must be made available to the borrower 3 days prior to closing. If there's any discrepancy, it's got to be redisclosed, and they have to get another 3 days. So I think a great test question is, if we're closing in 10 days, when must the closing disclosure be given to the buyer? On day 7, right? And if there's any discrepancy on it, we've got to restart that, and now we're going to now probably close on day 13. Debt ratios, credit scoring are another couple of things. Debt ratios is where we've discussed kind of that language around a front end and a back end. I think that they'll give you the numbers in the test question. But the example is a lender will only allow 36% of your gross monthly income to be debt. That's the maximum amount of debt. And within that, you can only have 28% of it be towards housing. So if you carry too much debt, that's going to creep into maybe the amount that you can borrow for a home. If you've got no debt, that doesn't mean that you can borrow for a house up to that full 36%. No, you still have to keep it within that 28% guide. Now, they will coach you through the numbers on the exam. I think the examples that we used in our book were 28 and 36. I just talked to a lender on behalf of a client to kind of get some information about whether to do a cash out refi for some remodeling they want to do, or whether they could do a HELOC. And the number that they used was 45 and 28. So they allow the borrower to have 45% of their income be debt, but only 28% of it can go towards actual house payment. Okay. The next one, number 5 topic, this is a big one for you, is general principles of agency. So this is going to be types of agents, like a broker, a salesperson, a broker associate, or a non-agent. A broker is going to be the one that is licensed in exchange for a fee for service. A broker assistant is going to be someone that has a broker's license, but they don't work independently. They work under a broker. I'm a broker associate. I've got my broker's license. I could go out, have my own independent, but I choose to still work under a broker. So I'm a broker associate. A salesperson, again, someone that cannot work independently, they've got to work under a broker. So the broker is the one that takes all the contracts and they appoint the salesperson to the contract. And then a non-agent is going to be maybe the accountant, your front desk person. It's maybe going to be an IT person, something like that, that works for you, that is not licensed. A big one is going to be that fiduciary responsibility. Now, this has 10 or 11 test questions, in case I forgot to say that. So this is getting of that 56 that you need to pass. This is 10% of them, right? No, it's more than that. Yes, no, that's right. No, it's 20%. Do I not know, I know how to do math? Should I even be conducting this course today? No, it'd be 20%, wouldn't it? So this is a big impact for you. But the big one underneath this, I think that you could see a lot of test questions, is around those fiduciary responsibilities. Again, my acronym for that, it's not mine, everybody uses it, is COLD AC. Care, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, accounting, confidentiality. Great listing presentation, by the way. I just gave you your job duties. Care means you're expected to know more than the general public because you're licensed. Obedience means you must follow the seller's orders within the law. So a good test question that I've seen is, you've had 35 showings and the seller asks you to take the sign out of the yard. What do you do? Now, there's a really good answer that says, coach your seller on the benefits of having the sign there because you got them 35 showings. But the question really is around obedience, and the answer is you take the sign out of the yard. You're not legally required to have one there. If they want it gone, they want it gone. Loyalty. This means you put the client's interest above your own. So a good example of a test question around this would be something like you're showing a property to buyers and you think, what a great deal. I'd love to buy this for my investment portfolio. What do? You let your buyers perform. You get out of the way. You don't compete with them. Disclosure talks about those latent defects or material adverse facts, which says no matter what, it's got to get disclosed to all parties. So a good example would be, I'm sure you've heard me say this before, seller says, Mary, I want to list my property with you, but I've had water in the basement and I don't want anyone to know. I'm not going to disclose it because I know that it will deter bringing me a buyer. What do? A really good answer that I've seen is, don't take the listing. And I kind of get it. Why would you want to work with a liar? But the best answer is, it doesn't matter. You've got to disclose it now anyway. If the seller's not going to, it's your duty now to. So 2 good answers And I would use that. A lot of you have my paper test that we do in 60-hour in our live class. And I always encourage you, like, read that exam and cross out 2 that you know aren't right. Now you got a 50-50 shot, right, y'all? Now you cannot do that on your computer screen, right? That would be awkward. And don't take a Sharpie. But I do mentally want you to think about that. And that's sometimes what I use my scratch paper for. I'll literally on the scratch paper write number 28, A, B, C, D, and I'll check out B and C. And I know I've got it narrowed down to A and D. And I sometimes physically still do that because I'm a visual person. And then that gets my mental, it helps me block out reading things now that are unnecessary for me to answer that test question. So I use that scratch paper not just to write big math questions. And remember that piece of paper, here's a little tip for you. It's front and back. You can write on both sides of it. Yeah. So don't feel limited. Tiffany, was that Captain Obvious for you? But a lot of people, when you're stressed and you're in a testing environment, I see people like writing really small in the corner and I think, sister, flip that over. But that's how your mind works when you're under pressure. That's why they never want you to say 9/11. They want you to say 911 because in a moment of crisis, you will go to your telephone and look for the number 11. And it won't be there and you won't know how to dial up for emergency. They seriously tested that.
Weird.
Yeah, but it applies to this stuff too. The other good thing is the Sesame Street game. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just isn't the same. A lot of times there's things that run in harmony. And yes, that can be a trick, but do look for consistency in those test questions. Next one. Talks about creation of agency. This is going to be express or implied agency. Express means orally or in writing, you've talked about the details of your working relationship. Express means we're just going through the actions and then we never detail it. And then they buy a property and don't include us. And now we want paid. Do we deserve to get paid? Nope. Because we never set out the course of our working relationship, oral or in writing. That's an example of Taylor Swift. She had an agent sue her because he showed her a townhome and then she bought it without him. Well, he never had an express agreement that he was going to represent her on that address. And he lost that lawsuit, fair and square, in my opinion. This talks a little bit about key elements of listing contracts and representation. I think the big one that you're going to need to know there is going to be termination of agency. And it gives examples of expiration, completion by force of law. That would be a bankruptcy. Destruction of property or death of principal. This doesn't mean death, you as the salesperson. It means death of the owner. Now, a great test question I can see for you is, what is the first opportunity you have to end your agency relationship with a seller? And it's going to be upon completion. That's your first opportunity, because if you have an agency agreement in writing from June 1st to September 1st, and you close on that property July 15th, do you owe them anything from July 16th until September 1st? No, you did your job and you can't represent them on a property they don't own anymore. Right? So that's your first opportunity to basically you do your job. That's how you terminate agency. The next one is property disclosure. You're going to have 4 to 5 test questions around this. I think probably a good test question I've maybe seen 2 recently in a study group I was following is you have a buyer come through an open house on one of your listings. You don't represent that buyer, obviously. They just show up to an open house and they say, should I get a home inspection? What's your best answer? And the best answer that was on that particular exam sample was, yes, if you choose to do so. What you don't want to do is say, oh, no. Sellers had one when they bought it. It turned out great. No, if the buyer wants one, they should get one. I think that you need to know, we talked a little bit about material or material adverse facts. Lead-based paint is another good one. Know that that disclosure must be made prior to homes built in 1978. That disclosure must be signed prior to the buyer writing an offer or a seller accepting it. Another really good one on that is if you see something in a property that is suspicious of maybe having asbestos in it, what do you do? What do you do with your buyer? Because you want to give them really good service, right? But here's the key thing. You're not a radon whisperer. You're not just going to walk into a home and be like, ah, my bangs just went flat. There must be a high level of radon in here, right? That's my example around that. That's not how it works. You can't see those things. So without having a professional test it, you cannot confirm or deny with any certainty that one of these environmental issues shows up. So you can say, you know what? Yes, homes in this area have radon. Iowa is notorious for having radon, but I cannot tell you whether it for sure exists or the level of whether it exists to a point of needing mitigated without you testing it first. So rely on the professionals. Okay, you're not just going to take in a cotton swab with 90% alcohol on it and wipe on the wall and be like, oh, there's lead base here. Yeah, right. It's got to be tested.
How do they test for the radon again?
They test for the radon with a monitor that basically, this is my cartoon version of it for you, Mary. It takes a huff of air in cycles and increments of time. And the measurements will maybe be 2 and 10 and 4. And what they're really looking for then is an average. And anything above 4.0, whatever the measurement increment is, they recommend being mitigated. The other thing that they look for on that exam, they usually set it for 48 hours. They do it in the lowest level of the home. In that 48 hours, they're looking for extremes. So if you got a 20 during the day while everyone's at work, and you got a 2 overnight, that's probably an indication that the sellers came home and opened their windows, let fresh air in. Yeah. So they're looking, I mean, there's definitely spikes in it to look for an overall average, but they also look for like extremes because that shows that maybe the seller, I'm not going to say contaminated the test, but it, you know, especially this time of year as we're kind of going into, well, let's face it, I've got my air conditioner on. But you know, this time of year as we go into maybe having windows open a little bit, can't do that for a radon test. It totally skews the outcome. Okay. Another big section here is going to be fair housing. Wait, no, I've skipped. Hold on. We're still on agency. We're still on property disclosure. Sorry, I skipped ahead. Let's go to contracts. We did property disclosure. Contracts is going to be another big one. You will have 13 to 14 test questions on this. So again, these last 2 subjects that we've talked about with principles of agency and contracts, now we're looking at 40% of what you need to pass. I will tell you lovingly right now that this is always the hardest part of the exam. So when you go and take the exam, all these topics I've been giving to you will be there. It will show you the number of questions that they asked and the number that you got right. You'll know whether you passed or failed right there at the test center. You'll get one of these documents for state, one for national. Keep a hold of those. You'll need to upload those to the Real Estate Commission when you apply for your license. Okay, so you'll get that sheet that'll show how many you got, how many they asked you, and how many you got right. And if you've taken the exam already, that could be a good litmus test for maybe where you got some squeaky wheels and what you know and what you don't know. For those of you going to take the exam now, this is a good strategy list. So if you really are like, Amy, I cannot do math, and I go hysterically blind and throw up every time I pull out a calculator, my therapist says it's not good for me. If that is really where we're at, you could skip all the math questions and still get a 72 on this exam, right? So my point of that is focus on the stuff that you do know just as much as the stuff you don't, because there might be some things on here that, if there's only 4 test questions about property disclosure and you don't have time to study it, that's only 4 or 5 test questions. It's not an impact. So agency, the laws around agency and contracts, which in your book, if you did what I call the yellow book, the modern real estate practice version 20 with me, it's chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11, correct?
Yeah.
8 and 9 are around agency and agency contracts. And I think 10 and 11 are around actual contracts. So the requirements for them being valid, again, I think you will absolutely have a question around like void or voidable, whether it's a valid contract. And remember with that, it's got to be signed and delivered. So it's got to be accepted and delivered. A buyer sends me a contract and I sign it and then I hold on to it and they call and say, you know what, we want to reject it. I can't say, oh, but wait, I already signed it. You can't back out now. They can. There's 2 steps to that. I sign it and I deliver it to the party. There he is for a hot second. Hi, Sean. Void and voidable. I think really where your questions around this are going to be around mental capacity, legal mental capacity, and being under the age of 18 with a minor. Mental capacity and minor, those are voidable. It is only a void contract if we know that they were already declared mentally incompetent in a court of law. Somebody goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs later because they're huffed up on Oxycontin after a back surgery or something and say, I didn't mean to sell my house. They're going to have to go to court to figure out what to do. If they'd already been declared mentally incompetent when they signed it, that would be a different story.
Hey, Amy, I had a question like that on the test where it was like the person went mentally ill and then her daughter did not have enough time, like she was too busy, and they was like, who is able to sell the property for her? And it was like a lawyer. It was the doctor that diagnosed her. Like you got to kind of get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I wonder if that question wasn't around a power of attorney.
Yeah. And power of attorney. Yep, absolutely.
And a power of attorney can, as long as the power of attorney specifically has real estate authority, they can sell that on their behalf. Right. Not all power of attorney is created equal, but a power of attorney can sell real estate for you.
Absolutely, because that was an option too. Because again, she had became mentally ill, and then her daughter was too busy to do anything, and then it was like, who was able to sell it for her?
Yeah, her power of attorney would be able to.
All right, sweet. Thank you.
You are welcome. Another one is executory and executed contracts. A really good question is, how long does a contract stay in the executory catalog? And it's until it closes. Once the transaction closes, then it's executed. And I will say real estate agents misuse that term. They use an executed contract language once all parties have signed it. Technically, that's wrong. It's an executory contract until it closes, then it becomes executed. We talked a little bit already about the notice of delivery and acceptance of contracts. Breach of contract and remedies for that breach. Anytime a buyer breaches a contract, the seller can sue for specific performance, or sorry, sue for damages. They can sue for damages. Liquidated damages is what they might also call it. If a seller defaults, the buyer can sue for performance. Then there's a topic on bilateral and unilateral contracts. Bilateral is when two parties are doing something. I'm going to pay Tiffany $127,000 for her condo. In exchange, she is going to give me clear title. And she's going to repair leaky faucet underneath the bathroom sink. I'm doing something, she's doing something. A unilateral contract, only one party is doing something. And a really good example of a unilateral contract is an option. That's where the buyer goes to the seller and says, I'll give you $50,000 to just hold this property until I'm ready to buy it. And then the seller sits there and holds. And in that contract period, they can't sell it to anyone. They literally just sit there and do nothing. And then the buyer decides whether they want to act on that option or not. Contract clauses, I think the major ones I've seen are addendums, amendments, and then I'm going to throw in a bill of sale. An addendum adds information to the contract, like the repairs the seller is going to make during a home inspection that they agree to do. An amendment changes it, and a bill of sale is good for personal property. We do not put personal property like pool tables or porch swings on a real estate contract, because if we do that, now the appraiser has to keep all of that into consideration, and they're not in the practice of pricing out all of those details. Their focus is real estate, so they don't want it on there. This talks about purchase agreements, general requirements, such as having legally competent parties. There must be consideration, which in our world is earnest money. It's got to be for a legal purpose. It's got to be accepted and delivered. It can have certain contingencies, or what I call subject to inspection, subject to appraisal, subject to sale of maybe their current property, subject to obtaining financing. And then another good one on there is time is of the essence. And time is of the essence is kind of a tricky one, because I think to most of us, if we had to guess that definition, it would be like everything needs to be done ASAP. We got to get stuff done. Well, that's not really what it means in a contract. It means that there's certain times that certain things have a deadline in order for us to close on time. So for example, you've got 5 business days to turn in an earnest money check. You've got maybe 10 business days to do a home inspection. You've got maybe 21 days to do the appraisal. You've maybe got 30 days for final underwriting in order for us to close on day 45 and close on time. So that doesn't mean, so here's what this does mean though. A seller cannot just call up the buyer and say, you know what? I want the inspection done ASAP. No, they've got 10 days to do it. That's what was in the agreement. So you can't just demand that everything be done ASAP. It's just got to be done within those parameters. Does that make sense? That is, time is of the essence. This talks about counter offers and multiple offers as well. And just keep in mind, a counter offer is a rejection of the original offer, which means the original no longer exists. So if I write an offer to Scott for his property for 300 and Scott says, no, I want 325. And I say, okay, well, thanks, Scott. It was nice knowing you. And he says, oh, no, wait. We'll do the 300. Am I obligated to buy it at 300? I'm not, because the moment he counteroffered and said 325, the deal's over. Now, I'm using an obvious example of price in a contract, but we all know that there's other elements in a contract like closing and possession, included items, closing costs, type of financing, all these different details. Just kind of what I call 9 big rocks in a contract. Any of those gets changed, the offer no longer exists. Okay. The next one is leasing and property management, and there's 2 or 3 test questions on here. I get feedback all the time like, oh my God, the property management questions are so hard. If you're going to have hard property management questions, by the way, they're not really going to be on the national, they're going to be on the state. They're going to be state specific. That says you can't just use Post-it notes to like move money around. You've actually got to have ledger entries and receipts for transferring money. You can't spend money that's not in the account. Those are state specific laws. In general, I want you to consider that of these 2 or 3 property management questions you have, one, a property manager has to have a listing, has to have a contract, just like a listing agreement. So when you think of property management, I want you to replace seller for landlord and buyer for tenant. The laws of agency, the laws of a valid contract, statute of frauds, statute of limitations, anything around that that affects contracts, that's the law is the law. It doesn't matter whether you're a landlord or a seller, a buyer or a tenant. So if they use property management in there, don't let that trip you up too much. It's still real estate. And if you're doing anything that involves negotiating in exchange for a fee, you've got to have a license. Doesn't matter whether you're doing property management, residential sales, commercial, you've got to have a license, right? So don't let that get tripped up too much. The next section is transfer of title. You'll have 6 or 7 test questions. Again, this is not insurance just for the buyer. It's an insurance policy so that if a lien gets recorded in the future, we've got a policy to cover the fee. So if a previous seller didn't pay that roofer, and then they sold it, and then the roofer's like, you know what, we never received payment. We'll put a lien against the property. That's not the current owner's fault, so they would use title insurance to alleviate that. Deeds will be a big part. And I think there's really 3 types of deeds that you're going to need to know about: a general warranty deed, a special warranty deed, and a quit claim deed. General warranty deed is what all buyers want because it's the highest form of protection when they purchase. A quit claim deed is easiest for the seller because it offers no protection and it's easiest for them. So a seller might want a quit claim deed, but a buyer's always going to want a general warranty deed. So a general warranty deed has the highest level of warranty against past, present, and future liens. Quit claim has no warranty to it at all whatsoever. Special warranty kind of fits in the middle where it warrants past and present, but not the future. It's a great deed that they typically use in a foreclosure when the bank goes to resell it to the public. Is this helping? Do you guys feel like you were remembering this stuff from a month ago, even though we've had to wait to have you test? Essential elements of a deed, again, legal binding properties for legal parties for a legal purpose. The other big one is it's got to be notarized. And the other one is it's got to be delivered and accepted. So just because the seller signs the deed doesn't mean that that's when the deed passes. It's when it's delivered and accepted by the buyer. Become a notary, by the way. sos.iowa.gov. Because you can notarize those deeds for your sellers then. The important part of recording the deed is so that we know who accurately owns it. So let's say the last deed holder that was recorded was Ashawn. But he sold it to Tiffany and Tiffany never recorded the deed. What am I going to do? I'm going to go and I'm going to buy it from Ashawn, and guess what? He doesn't legally own it anymore. But we don't know that because Tiffany never recorded her deed. And so then I would end up buying it from Ashawn fraudulently, and guess who technically would be able to bump ownership? Tiffany. So that's why we want these things on public record, is so that we know that the right person has the right to sell it. This talks a little bit about escrow and closing. And an escrow account is used to settle closings. They take in all the money, the down payment from the buyer, and they take in the money from the lender, the person lending them the money. And that covers their purchase price and their closing costs. Then from that bundle, we start paying bills on behalf of the seller. We pay off their mortgage. We prorate taxes. We provide a warranty. We provide closing costs. And then what's left, we pay broker's fees. Most important part, right? Wink, wink. We pay all those bills for them. And then what's left over, they get as proceeds. We don't leave the seller to pay all those bills for themselves, because guess what would probably really happen? It wouldn't get done. Or we think, we can use an extra $1,200. We're going to be getting a stimulus check. And then I don't know about you, but I ain't seen a stimulus check. Is it because my last name's Schaefer?
No, it's weird though.
Nope. Nothing.
Because you're self-employed?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But could you see someone doing that? Like they see a little moment there to like kind of do a rob Peter pay Paul situation, and then bills wouldn't get paid. That's why we have an escrow company do it through their account. And remember, an escrow account, whether it's for earnest money, like trust accounts, whether it's for how they pay your taxes and insurance, an impound escrow account for your mortgage, or this situation where they use an escrow account for closings. Remember, escrow accounts are always other people's money. I always want to say OPP, like other people's property, as an example of this, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate. But I said it anyway. It's other people's property. It's their money. So we cannot put it into our general funds. It's not ours to put into our general funds. General funds is how we pay our electric bill and salaries, commissions. Those things cannot be commingled. That's illegal. It's a form of conversion. I would know, this talks about prorated items. Taxes is probably going to be your big one. Closing statements, again, those must be 3 days prior to closing. I would know the definition of a foreclosure and a short sale. Our last big rock is practice of real estate. This has 10 to 11 test questions. I've just given you about 40% in those 3 topics of what you need to pass this exam. So this is another really, really big rock. Practice of real estate is going to cover those trust accounts that I just talked about, also known as an escrow account. The purpose of it, again, it's other people's money. Again, the term commingling and conversion is what makes that illegal. It cannot go into general funds. This will cover fair housing and ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Absolutely review your protected classes. I would know the definitions of redlining, blockbusting, and steering. Redlining is that act of lenders drawing a red outline on a map that says if you sell to anyone of a minority, for example, you're making a bad loan. And I have seen with everything going on in our world this last week or two, redlining has come up in the news. I've seen in the news several examples of them pulling up maps and showing how redlining used to work, and maybe we're finding that it still is being used. Blockbusting is for sellers. That's where we're going and we're saying, I'll tell you, the neighborhood is turning and there's a bunch of new young families moving in. There's going to be toys everywhere and cars and right? You want to sell now. That's blockbusting. Steering is when we go to a buyer and we say, you don't want to live here. There's a bunch of unicorns that live in the neighborhood and you're not a unicorn, right? That is steering. A good test question that I've also seen around that recently is if you've got a minority client that has given you a price point of $100,000 to $120,000 as their search criteria, and then they send you 2 properties that they want to see for $90,000 and you refuse to show it to them, are you breaking the law? And the answer is yes. That's not right to do. If they want to see that $90,000, you go show them that $90,000. You can't say no because you're pre-qualified for more. Americans with Disability Act, again, keep in mind that is for public places. That's not for residential. Your exemptions are going to be for sale by owner of less than 4 units. If they have not used a real estate professional and they are not using discriminatory advertising. And then it does, I would review some advertising. If you are renting a room and you want another female to live there, if you are renting a room out in your home, you can say female. But if you're renting an apartment building, you cannot say adults only or females only. Another good section of this is that licensee and responsibility, knowing the difference between being an employee and an independent contractor. So a great test question I had when I audited the exam the last time was something around the fact that as an independent contractor, you set up an LLC. What is your broker now required to do for you? Pay health insurance, set up a 401k, hold back taxes for Social Security, or do nothing? Everything remains the same. And the answer is they do nothing. It remains the same. You're still an independent contractor. Just because you set up an LLC for your business does not mean you become an employee, is the purpose around that. Antitrust laws is another big section of this. And antitrust laws, I'm going to say you're going to have maybe 3 test questions on it. And antitrust laws, the first thing I think you should know is the definition. And these are laws that prohibit monopolies, and they're put in place to create an open market that is fair and competitive, that does not limit the free flow of trade. So a monopoly would be me buying out Scott and Patricia's business just so I could close the door and get all the business for myself, because now people can't comparison shop. They can only come to me, right? And you've really got 5 sections of those antitrust laws. One is going to be price fixing. One's going to be allocation of markets or allocation of customers. Tie-in agreements is another good one. So I would review those as well, because you could have some examples of, usually price fixing and tie-in agreements are the big ones on the exam. And last but not least, your last section is going to be real estate calculations, or what we've lovingly been calling math. You've got 8 test questions on this. Loan to value ratios. So that's the amount being borrowed versus the amount you're using as down payment. Discount points, again, that is 1% of the amount being borrowed. Property tax calculations. So this is going to be around prorating taxes. And if you've got to prorate taxes, my guess that I've had in my experience is it's always based on the formula, the 360-day formula that is 12 months and 30 days. So just take the tax amount, divide it by 12, and then divide it by 30 for a daily rate. Now, if it just says prorated taxes, that means they're not due yet, and the seller owes a credit to the buyer for the time they've owned the home, but the taxes aren't due yet. So it's a credit to the buyer. If it says prepaid, that means the seller paid it at the beginning of the year, and now the buyer owes the seller credit. So just be careful for that trick, because the last exam I had 3 questions about prorating taxes. Commission splits is one. Transfer tax or revenue stamps could be another one. They'll give you everything that you need in that exam question. It'll be based on purchase price, and it'll be given like $1.60 per 1,000. So divide by 1,000, and how many increments you have, multiply it by $1.60, for example. PITI payments, or principal and interest payments, this is where you're going to use that mortgage factor chart. I anticipate you'll have, last time I took the exam, I had 3 proration and 3 P&I questions. So I only had 2 other random math questions. But that mortgage factor chart, if you're using the Modern Real Estate book, That's on page 221. Otherwise, when you go to the test center, this mortgage factor chart will be laminated and maybe even taped to the desk. It is calculated per 1,000 borrowed. And the last time I was at the test center, it even said that at the top, based on $1,000 borrowed. It even gave that hint on there. So you take the amount being borrowed, not the purchase price, not the appraised value, but the amount being borrowed divided by 1,000. Then you're going to go find that factor number based on the interest rate and the term of the loan, or the number of years of the loan. Take that factor number and multiply it. That gives you the principal and interest payment. Okay. Now in our book, it's got 15 and 30 years. My experience at the test center is theirs is a little bit expanded. It was 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, and 40 years. So a couple of questions around this is, it could be a straight up borrower is borrowing $120,000. What's their P&I payment? Another one could be, what's the difference in payment between an interest rate of 5% and an interest rate at 8%? And you've got to do those two calculations, subtract one from the other. Another one could say the sales price was 200, the appraised value was 195, and the assessed value is 220. If the borrowers are doing a 90% loan to value, what's their P&I payment? And then they would give the interest in terms. So the first thing you got to do is, between those three numbers, which one are we going to use? The purchase price at 200, the appraised at 195, or the assessed at 225? What number can we use to calculate off of?
Sale price. Sale price.
In that situation, we have to use appraised value because it was $5,000 less than the purchase price.
Oh, that's right.
So we can only calculate off of appraised value. I had one like that. Another one that I had was, what is the maximum term of a loan that you can have at a 5.5% interest rate and keep your payment under $900? So you had to do the factor chart at that rate at 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and just pick the one that kept it right under $900. They wanted to know the term of the loan. So see, there's several different ways that they can come at you with that mortgage factor. Those of you that have already tested, did you have the mortgage factor chart multiple times?
I don't think I did. I feel like I probably had like one question like that.
Okay,
mine,
well,
mine were easy. Like I had like a couple of discount point questions, and then I do want to say a pro rate, but it was kind of shocked me because I didn't even use the chart. You know what I mean?
I'm disappointed because I know you would have done really well at it.
Yes, but I hope it's the same way again because I don't want to look at I don't want to look
You
at
want to be done with
anyway,
that?
so. Yeah, and so I was shocked behind that because I didn't even have to. If I did, it was once, but I feel like I didn't even have to use that chart. So I guess I got lucky. I did good. All my math questions were sweet, so I was happy.
Oh, well, good for you.
Now you got me worried. Now I'm worried, though. Thanks.
Wait, was not here to jinx you again.
Amy, can you just explain like the process again? So you take the amount being borrowed divided by 1,000.
Yes.
Then you go
And
to
then
the chart.
that number, hold that number, and then you'll go over to the factor chart, and it will tell you, the rate and term of the loan that you got to figure. So you'll go down to like 5.5% and over to 30 years, and it's going to give you a factor number. You take that factor number and you multiply these two numbers, and that gives you your principal and interest.
Okay.
I'm so confused.
Are you so confused?
Yeah, just a little bit. Sorry.
So let's say we're borrowing $100,000. Divide that by 1,000, and then how many units then do we have?
Okay. So we find the
We have
units
100
on
units, right?
100 units. Yeah, on the
So hold that 100 there, and then let's go over to our mortgage factor chart. And the question wanted an interest rate of 5.5 for 30 years. Let's just, I don't have it memorized, but let's say that factor number is 6.2. So we would take 6.2 times 100, and our payment would be, hold please, I'm making up these numbers. Yeah, duh, it would be 620. I almost said that, but then I wasn't confident, but you don't believe me because I didn't say it. It would be $620 for principal and interest. But the key thing is it's the amount borrowed. So you got to take into effect the, what number are we using? Appraised, purchase, or purchase, appraised, or assessed.
appraised.
What's your down payment? You got to get rid of their down payment because it's
Okay.
the amount being borrowed. So that means you'll need to learn how to do that loan to value, those examples again, which I think we did loan to value math there in the margin of your book. That's at least where mine is. 5 or 6 times. Okay. What do we have for questions? We got 15 minutes left. I know I've not really hit on state a lot. I think for state, some of your big things are going to be around trust accounts, 5 business days to deposit a check. You got to keep materials. You got to keep documents for 5 years. So 5 banking days for earnest money or rent deposits. 5 years, you got to hold documents. Earnest money can only be released by the signature of buyer and seller, no matter who's right or wrong, or they got to go to mediation. You can use a diamond ring as long as it was part of the original disclosure. You can't just say I'm doing $1,000 down and then surprise, here's my Cabbage Patch Kid collection from the 80s in exchange. It's got to be a cashable check unless it was originally disclosed. I would know I would review the permitted and prohibited practices that require a license. A good one is around what your unlicensed assistant can do and not do. They can give no advice. They cannot select vendors. They cannot hold earnest money, which means they actually just hold on to it. They can deposit it on your behalf, but they can't be the one that holds it. So they're basically able to make keys, and they can never answer real estate questions to the public. They can never host open houses alone, okay? You've got to have 36 hours of continuing education. 8 of them must be law. 4 of them must be ethics. We renew our license in 3-year increments, with your first year counting as the full year, no matter when you get licensed. So you get licensed right now, guys, this summer, which a lot of you will be rolling in and doing that, right? 2020 counts as your first full year, then all of 2021, and then you'll renew by December 31st of 2022. If you do not renew, if you don't have your continuing education, you can still renew. They have a 30-day grace period with a $25 fine. You can do that for 3 years before you got to start all over. Another big one is what is the role of the real estate commission? It's to protect the public. That's another big one. I think another big one that I've had is, when can you approach a seller about their listing? And the answer is when they contact you first, okay? So I would know the difference between, didn't really spell this out in the outline, but I would know a difference between an exclusive right to sell, which is one person lists the property, no matter who gets paid, no matter who sells it, the broker gets paid, sorry. Exclusive listing means the seller still retains the right to sell it on their own. Open listings means we've got multiple listing agents and the seller can still retain the right to sell it on their own. Net listings are illegal. So anything that's an exclusive right to sell, whether it's seller or buyer, or an exclusive agency, whether it's seller or buyer, you cannot approach those people unless they approach you. And I've had that same test question 3 times on the state before.
Hey, Amy,
Yes.
if I can answer this one, and this one, all these 3 packets with 97 to 100% success, do you feel like I would be prepared?
I do, because even though the questions, Scott, will be different, I will say that that big packet of test questions is a really good tool to help you learn how to answer test questions, how to slow down and read from like maybe a double negative, like the word not, or all the following except. It's really good to train your brain to just slow down, read, because I've admitted to you, when I see a test question that's 5 lines long, I'm like, I don't have, my attention span is not that long, and my patience level, I've told you guys, is very short. I love being patient with you guys, but anything else, I'm like, brr. So I read those and I'm like, oh, you expect me to read? And no, I think practicing all of this helps you slow down and be like, yes, Amy, you're an adult. You're going to read. You're going to read a contract, aren't you? That's 5 pages long. And the font's like this big. It's got a lot of words on it. I thankfully memorized mine. So now I'm done reading a little bit. But it just trains your brain to do that. The state versions of both of those, if you can really memorize those, I think you'll have a very, very high level of success. I think where sometimes people fall off on state a little bit, passing it is they have a little test anxiety. And I think sometimes we just get in and it's the first thing that we're doing and we maybe overthink things a little bit. And again, have a little test anxiety. But when I've taken the state exam as an audit the past 4 or 5 years, there's nothing in there that's missing. I mean, their pool of questions is a lot smaller than the national. Probably has 4,000 that rotate through as questions for you. State's smaller.
Okay.
A little bit more straightforward. So long story long, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I also think that the PSI for $20, we've talked about that being a good one. If there's any sections that you're maybe struggling with, that prep agent, the Joe guy that wears the fedora on YouTube, he's got a lot of good things. I've actually been studying those myself. The only person I don't know if I've met on here, is it Dina? Dina, if you can hear me, because I can't see you. Let's talk about how to get a hold of me, because I would like to, once this is downloaded, I'll send you the link to YouTube. I'll send that out to all of you again so that you can rewatch this. And then number 2, I was in a Facebook group that was talking about the PSI study exam questions, and they gave a template of 173 standard questions they've seen on there. Now, I've reviewed the document, and I'll be honest, of the questions, of that 173 questions, I personally, when I've taken the exam, remember none of them being on there. But there were like 3 or 4 people that collaborated on it. And so I'm going to share it with you because I thought it was a really good source that was PSI specific and might save you $20.
If we're scoring well on that $20 PSI practice test,
I think you should be good.
okay. It
kind of goes both ways, you guys. I always think try to start getting 80%, because then when you get to the test center, if you mess up a few things because you got a little anxiety, you got a little buffer there. But I also see a lot of people that start getting in the 60% that study, and then once they get to the test center, they realize they're in a zone, and they come up and pass with 70% too. So get in that range of 60 to 80%. Again, I don't care what your score is.
Right. I just want to make
care
sure
that
that
you pass.
I'm in that area. I was feeling like I was maybe even a bit overconfident. I'm like, I'm going to crush it. I'm going to get 100%. So I just want to make sure I'm not overdoing it here with.
Well, I don't know that you can overdo it, but at the same time, I don't care what your score is, and I don't care how many times you take the exam. I only care that you get your real estate license and you go get your unfair share.
Awesome. Thank
and
you.
sell my listings. I want you to sell my listings.
Absolutely.
Just kidding. We're not in the same market, but you know what I mean.
I know.
Any last minute questions I can help you answer? Dina, again, I'd love to connect with you because I don't know that we've met. And I'm not sure that you're on my list of things that I've sent out to you before, but obviously you found us today and I love it. So if there's a way that we can reach out, I would appreciate it.
Amy,
Otherwise, any other questions?
I just have one thing real quick. So the guy on YouTube, since I'm going to be driving 4+ hours, what is his name? Did you find that out?
It's Joe somebody, but it's under Prep Agent. If you just go to YouTube and look up Prep Agent, and he's got a lot of different topics and they're broken down by contracts.
Okay, so I can
Math.
listen to him while I'm driving 4 hours
Yeah.
or 4.5
And you
hours.
can listen to these YouTubes. I've had several people reach out and say that they've been driving around listening to this YouTube on their radio too.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.
So like for Kate and I, which is crunch time for both of us, what would be your crunch time suggestions for the next 2 to 4 days for us?
Crunch time suggestion is, I would say, do that big packet of test questions. I really like that key matching term quiz that I gave you as homework from the first week. I studied that a lot myself.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working in that yellow book, I would say do the key point review. Maybe not the quizzes. I think those are helpful, but you know my opinion. You're not going to have 20 questions on chapter 1. You're maybe going to have 1 or 2. So you don't need 20 questions. But I do think that those key point reviews are very, very helpful. Some of you might want to consider that Dearborn. I get a lot of good feedback on that Dearborn app. I know that that's some money, but I do get a lot of feedback on that.
Here on the
Quizlet.
Dearborn app, it was good, but I heard that you get 3 days trial free. So you could sign up 3 days for it for free.
Yeah.
3 days before you go and use it there for that way.
So I would do the free. I would take advantage of Quizlet. They don't cover state information, but there's a lot of good test questions on Quizlet, Quizlet. And I would either Google PSI exam or real estate exam. I found some good things on there that I have seen verbatim on the exam.
Didn't you also give us, and I've been in the book most of the time recently, in these packets, didn't you give us some actual questions that came off of the test, the most recent one?
Yeah, I gave on the big test packet, I think I call them bonus questions, but I think I called it something else in the actual test packet because you guys weren't really liking the word bonus very well. But there is a section that's just at the back that I think I added an extra 70. Sean's put the link over here to the Prep Agent videos. If you want to snag that really quick in the little chat. Thank you, Sean. Anything else? I love seeing your smiling faces. I've missed all of you. You guys have all been staying safe and healthy.
Yes.
Good. Well, I'm really proud of all of you. And like I said, tomorrow once this is downloaded, I'll get this and that little practice test out as soon as I can to all of you again. And go get them. I'll see you guys very soon, okay?
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. I appreciate
Amy.
you joining me
Thank
today. I
you.
hope this was helpful.
Thank you.
Good luck, Kate.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good luck, you too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
I didn't
Bye.
say hi today. Bye-bye.
Oh, bye,
Bye.
guys.